What is going on, football fans? Huge news just dropped in the NFL. I know it came out probably a couple hours ago now, but kind of wanted to wait until all the details came out until I was able to give you guys a video. Now, to my knowledge, not all the details have come out, but enough. I feel enough have come out for me to be able to speak on it. And this was kind of something that I was waiting for. I think a lot of Giants fans and football fans in general were waiting for, specifically fans that have young quarterbacks, because we're kind of antsy and we're nervous to see how it will reset the NFL market. In terms of teams that this benefits outside of the Chiefs and everyone else, I think it benefits teams that signed the quarterbacks that were worth signing to big deals before this took place. Teams like the Seattle Seahawks with Russell Wilson. Maybe if he could stay healthy, the Eagles with Carson Wentz. I'm not going to say a guy like Jared Goff because he's not worth the money that he's getting paid, but teams like that were able to sign their future franchise quarterbacks to a contract extension before the market accelerated, I think it benefits those teams. This deal, when you look at it, is insane. And I think we all knew that Pat Mahomes was going to, reset the market, and he beyond did that. He definitely reset the quarterback market in the NFL, and I've said countless times that I think the quarterback market is insane as is. I think it's the most overpaid position in all of sports. And that's not to say that I don't recognize it's the most important. It definitely is. But there are few quarterbacks that are talented enough that are worth the money that they get paid. And to me, I don't care what a guy gets paid. But as a fan, I care about what it ties up into my salary cap. People often tell me, well, who are you to say what the guy's worth? Well, when you play a salary cap sport and your quarterback is eating up between 16 and 20% of your cap, it hurts the rest of the team. If it was baseball, go out and spend whatever you want to try to win. But that's not the way it works in the NFL. And when you look at over the course of history, I did a video on this, there's only been 5 quarterbacks ever that have won a Super Bowl since 1994, the salary cap era, that have won a Super Bowl when they tied up more than 10% of their team's cap. We're talking about tying up over 20%. I could be mistaken. I don't think there's ever been a quarterback that's tied up more than 15, maybe 16% of his team's cap and has gone on to win a Super Bowl. And if there has been, there's been one. Eli Manning did it over 10 when it was 11%. It becomes so much more challenging unless you're a guy like Pat Mahomes, and even then, obviously, it's more challenging, but I do think it's possible with a guy like Pat Mahomes. But unless you're the best or the second best, an immortal quarterback that could really get the most out of everything around him and could make up for the deficiencies, it is proven to not be worth what quarterbacks get paid today on the open market in terms of percentage. So who does this benefit the most? Well, I said the teams that have already signed their quarterbacks. I think it benefits the Kansas City Chiefs the most. And as much as you may say that's crazy, well, the Kansas City Chiefs spent money where it was meant to be spent. Pat Mahomes is worth that money, and you have the coach in place. Two most important positions on a football team are a head coach and a quarterback. Kansas City Chiefs have arguably the second best head coach in football, in my opinion, outside of only Bill Belichick, who's set to retire, and they have the most talented quarterback, and I don't think anybody would debate that. And to be able to pair them up in a marriage for what you hope is the next at least 7 or 8 years, depending on Andy Reid's age, he is 62 years old. Mahomes had 2 more years left on his rookie deal. This is an extension. So Mahomes was due to make about $27 million over the next 2 years. He'll still receive that. The next 10, now the figures aren't completely out, but we know it's over $400 million, or at least $40 million on a 10-year basis. Now, I don't know the guarantees, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot. I mean, when you look at Pat Mahomes, supposedly there were discussions on whether or not Pat Mahomes would be able to convince the Kansas City Chiefs to make it dependent on the salary cap. So basically he gets paid 18% of the cap. We'll just throw out a number out there, or 20% of the cap based on whatever the cap is. So as the cap accelerates, so does his contract. Well, word came out that the Chiefs were not willing to do that. Now, maybe that's changed, but if it hasn't, it could in the end work out to be a great deal for the Kansas City Chiefs, as crazy as that sounds, because he's one of the few quarterbacks that is worth it. And the reason you sign him to such a long deal, obviously, health is the biggest factor. He has to remain healthy. But if Pat Mahomes remains healthy, the reason you sign him to such a long deal in 3 or 4 years, where it's normal to pay a quarterback $45, $46 million, you're going to be paying the best at that rate, where other teams are paying quarterbacks like Dak Prescott the same amount of money. So I understand it from the Kansas City Chiefs perspective. In terms of the teams it hurts the most, well, for one, all the teams in the AFC West, because now you got to see Andy Reid and Pat Mahomes for the next decade or 12 years. Like I said, if Reid remains the coach. Now, I'm sure there's a way that the Chiefs could get out of this contract, year 7, 8, 9, whatever it may be, if he does regress in play or get injured or something like that. But expect Mahomes to see the majority of this contract with the Chiefs. And obviously, the Chargers, the Broncos, and the Raiders are affected the most. But the teams, like I said, with the young quarterback that are coming up on that deal are the teams that really have to think twice of whether or not those quarterbacks are going to be worth the price that this will cost. And in my opinion, if I was a GM, I'm not signing a quarterback unless he's a top 5 quarterback to a deal that will tie up 18 to 20% of my cap. The numbers just back it up. Matt Stafford was not a top 5 quarterback. He was a borderline top 10. Lions haven't won anything since they've extended him. They made the playoffs, I believe, before they did it. The Falcons, Matt Ryan, didn't work out very well when they paid him. Jared Goff hasn't worked out too well since they gave him that extension. And the numbers just back it up. It is not worth it to pay your quarterback 16, 17, 18% unless they're an elite quarterback. And even then, it's questionable because it's still a 53-man sport. And I know the quarterback is the most important position, but the quarterback depends on every other position around him, the offensive line, the wide receivers, the running backs, to help him out. You know, we saw it firsthand as New York Giants fans with Eli Manning. Like I said, Eli Manning won his second Super Bowl when he tied up 11% of the cap. He then got that huge extension after where he was the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and you saw what it did. You saw what it did to Joe Flacco the year after he won his Super Bowl. The Giants struggled mightily because they couldn't draft well. If you do that, you have to be able to draft phenomenally to be able to support your quarterback, and that is not easy to do. A guy like Pat Mahomes, he's a guy that gets the most out of his players. And they do have Tyreek Hill tied up, I believe, for another 3 years because they extended him last year. I'm not 100% what that contract is. But I think for the Chiefs, it's fine because when you pay the best quarterback in the sport that type of money, you can make it work. It's when you pay the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th best quarterback in the league that type of money. And Giants fans may not want to hear that. Giants fans may want to hear that Daniel Jones is going to be the guy for 15 years. And obviously, we'll have to wait and see. And I'm not even thinking about it right now. We still got 4 more years on the rookie deal, plus the ability to franchise tag him, although obviously quarterbacks hold out and things like that. We saw that with Dak Prescott this year, and people have called Dak Prescott crazy. But when you look at it, and yes, you could call it greedy, whatever it may be, because he has been set up with a great foundation, and I think most of us agree he's maybe a top 10 quarterback in the sport who's been given a great situation. If you gave him a situation where he had to make do with, make players better around him, he may not be as good. And if the Cowboys are to extend him, they will have to figure that out. But after this deal, I think it's even more likely that the Cowboys will move on from Dak either at the conclusion of this year or the following year, where they will have the option to franchise tag him a second time. But I don't think Dak will be in the long-term plans of the Cowboys. And like I've said all along, I think it's the right decision. As a Giants fan, I want them to tie him up because, like I said, there's only 2, maybe 3 quarterbacks that are worth tying up 18 to 20% of your cap in. And that is what it would cost for the Cowboys to keep Dak Prescott. And until this quarterback market alters and quarterbacks aren't getting paid in terms of percentage, what they're getting paid against the cap, I think it's in most teams' best interest to move on after 6 or 7 years, after your franchise tag them once or twice. You might call me crazy, and I know that it's hard to find franchise quarterbacks, but quarterbacks rely heavily on being able to support him with a sound roster. A lot of people point to the Redskins, and obviously it didn't work out either way. They were a bad team. But a lot of people point to the Redskins and say they made a horrible decision not keeping Kirk Cousins. Now, I can't tell you it was a great decision because they've been bad. Obviously, they had very bad luck with Alex Smith, who they signed to a short-term contract. But what would they have been? They would have been floundering in mediocrity. Maybe Cousins makes you an 8-win team. That's the last place you want to be in the NFL. And that's what happens when you pay quarterbacks like Matt Stafford and Kirk Cousins top-tier money. They're not good enough to get a team to be a Super Bowl contender if they're not on a rookie deal. And that is what the Redskins saw. And because of that, well, the Redskins now have gotten Chase Young. They've gotten good players. At least they've been at the top of the draft. And that is what my philosophy would be unless I felt I had at a bare minimum a top 5 quarterback. Unless you're a top 5 quarterback, you're not worth that type of money. But for the Chiefs, it's an absolute home run. It's a steal because they set the market now and they got the quarterback that is worth setting the market for. I expect the Kansas City Chiefs to potentially be the next dynasty in the NFL if all goes according to plan for them, like I said, and Mahomes stays healthy. But it is very rare that you have the most talented, and Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback ever by most people's standards, and it's completely understandable. The guy won 6 Super Bowls. But you could definitely make the argument that he definitely wasn't the most talented. He had the greatest coach. Now you're coupling the most talented quarterback in the league right now, maybe the most talented ever, when you watch some of the things that Pat Mahomes could do. And if he's not, he's in the top 5. You're coupling him with an offensive mastermind with Andy Reid. You look at what Andy Reid did with the Eagles, even though he didn't win Super Bowls. Take a look at some of those receivers that he had those great offenses with, some of those running backs. I mean, James Thrash, Pinkston. He didn't have the, household names, but because he's such an offensive mastermind, you saw what he was able to do with Donovan McNabb. Well, when you give him a toy like Patrick Mahomes, it is worth the investment. And it is only then when it is. It is very hard to find a great coach that's a top 3 or 4 coach in the league. It's even harder to find a quarterback that is a top 3, 4 in the league. And when you compare the two, there is no amount of money that is not worth trying to keep that together. And that's what the Chiefs did, and they made the right decision. Now, what this will probably result in, based off of prior history, as a lot of teams will follow suit, and they will overpay quarterbacks, and they will be floundering in mediocrity. At least that's my opinion. Like I said, hopefully Daniel Jones elevates himself to be a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the game, and we don't got to think twice, but we got a long way till we got to start thinking about that. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.